from the News Channel 5 Network. This is Score on Business.
Hey, welcome to Score on Business. This is Pete Hendricks. I'm Pete Hendricks, and a serial entrepreneur, your host for today. Many prospective entrepreneurs aren't sure where to start, and I'll share some ideas in a few minutes, but let's get started. We're very lucky our first guest, Commander Jaime Hernandez, recently retired from the U.S. Navy. One of his roles was being on a small strategy team for General Mattis during the time that he led all operations in the Middle East. They would assist, and this was a small group, like 9 people or 10 people. They would assist General Mattis in preparing for meetings with the President of the U.S., the Secretary of State, and Congress. As well, they assisted with strategy on a variety of operational issues, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for asking me to be here. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, Pete.
Oh, it is, and you know, of course, I invited you today. The military is not exactly an entrepreneur organization, but entrepreneurs face a variety of problems and need to develop a coherent strategy, both of which are areas of expertise from your work there. Can you tell us about the methodology your team used for problem solving?
Sure. Well, that's, you know, again, my time working strategy, we had an enormous amount and very different set of problems that we addressed. Mm-hmm. And we definitely developed a methodology. And I could tell you the very first thing, there's a quote, I believe it's from Albert Einstein, said, mm-hmm. if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem.
Right.
And I learned that while I was working for General Mattis, because the very first thing that we would do is define the problem. And that is such an important aspect to problem solving, because many times, whether you're a military operator or an mm-hmm. entrepreneur, you need to know where to address your attention. Right.
The symptom may feel like the problem, but the problem is something underneath.
That's right. So we would work as diligent as possible up front to define the problem, and with everybody that was working the problem, you know, the staff members, any other staff that was there to help us out, we made sure we all had agreement on this is actually the problem. So once we got through that process to define the problem, that could mm-hmm. take anywhere from 5 minutes in a crisis, which we saw many times, or it could take 3 months, 3 to 6 months in some long campaigns. From there, we would go out and we would list our assumptions. And knowing what assumptions you're making with regards to the problem is, you know, that's so important, because as your solution moves forward, you need to look back on what was my assumption initially, and is that still true?
That is really, really important. And I hate to say it, it hadn't occurred to me before, but the assumptions will skew it all over everywhere if they're not good ones.
Well, completely. And so as we would start working a problem, we'd list those assumptions, and for a military operation, it could be something as profound and limiting as we're not going to have boots on the ground. You know, that's a typical one you mm-hmm. may hear in a military problem solving. But for an entrepreneur, it could be, you know, I am not going to expand into a certain market, or I'm going to limit myself to this product for this problem. Mm-hmm. Those are just a couple of examples where it's extremely important, because as time goes on and any problem solver is dealing with you know, those fires immediate, they need to make sure that they're still aligned with those assumptions that are part of that problem.
Right, and that's so important. As an entrepreneur, and when you're starting a business, you want money from wherever you can do it, but you can't do everything. You really have to kind of, you know, in line with the no boots on the ground, the entrepreneurs need to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this. We're going to do it really well. Yeah.
Right. So once you have those assumptions listed out, and, you know, keep them close to you so you can look at them, the next thing you need to do is you need to lay out what resources you have available. For a military planner, it could be, you know, units, ships in the area. It could be troops that you're going to have, budget constraints, whatever you're going to have available for that problem is extremely important to know and to explore. Mm-hmm. So in the entrepreneur sense, you know, there's a vast amount of resources that aren't tangible. It could be relationships, maybe with the commerce or another organization where they could find additional resources. It could be additional labor, contract work. There's so many different examples where you need to know as you're trying to solve that problem, where am I going to get my solution from? And then finally, the last process to this method is to lay out the actions. And this is a little brainstorming exercise, but you need to lay out all the potential actions based on your assumptions for that problem. And then it should be a very long list. Once you have that list laid out, you need to look at how effective each action is going to be, and how much effort is going to be required. And you, as a solution finder, is going to be able to prioritize those best for your problem going forward.
Right. And when I think about problem solving for me, sometimes I get caught up in the negative, the problem, and I'll be thinking, oh, this problem's so terrible, where if I'll flip and think about the solution, that's what actually can help me get it solved.
Definitely, and some of my friends that are entrepreneurs, and I'll sit down and have a cup of coffee with them, and they'll start telling me their problems. And after about 15 minutes, I hear a lot of problems, and I try to get to them. I'm like, You've gone a full gamut on the spectrum of, you started with lack of revenue, and now you're telling me about, relationships with customers. And, and I just kind of try to coach them along to, you need to figure out which problem is the one that's is most holding you down, and then find that solution.
Okay, so can you share the way in which your team assisted General Mattis with strategy issues?
Okay, well, I thank you for that question. It's it was a humbling experience to work for General Mattis, and he's such a national asset, a wonderful boss, a wonderful American. But it's kind of like that question. When I first heard it, I felt like, how do I tell Yoda how to beat Darth Maul?
Yeah, and I mean, for people who, General Mattis is one of the great generals of this generation.
Very much so. He will be written about and talked about for generations. Yeah. So, and when it comes to strategy, I would say he is that master strategist. So my role, I found that my team's role was really simplification. The most precious commodity for a master of anything is time. So what we would try to do is simplify whatever was coming in for a strategy. Time, he did not have time to pontificate. So sometimes some of these problems were very large and significant, and there'd be hundreds of planners involved and decision makers involved in the process. So we would try to align as much as we could ahead of time what the narrative would be, and that's where spending time and getting to know the boss's intent is extremely important. So let's say the problem was moving equipment out of theater, a large amount of equipment that we've had in place for a decade. There's a cost associated with that. There's a tremendous amount of effort. Once you put in all the experts on that process in a room, you could spend months. It's like coming up with a plan. He might only have it half an hour to get there. So we would align all the stakeholders, and we would say, okay, let's keep this simple. What is the issue here?
One thing that's kind of jumping out at me, he's a great strategist, so you didn't actually do the strategy. You helped kind of, I think of unintended consequences. So sometimes our leaders in the U.S. will pass a law meant to do some good, but there's unintended consequences. So what you were doing is trying to get it down to, when he got ready to do the strategy, he had the meat and the important things.
Correct. He was going to just kind of give us that guidance that we could go and take that guidance and apply it to whatever issue we were looking at. And so it could be keeping the information brief and effective. And so a lot of times we prepare information papers no longer than 2 pages, double-spaced, 12-point font. I still remember that. And some services love PowerPoint. And, and they'd bring to the table a 100-slide PowerPoint presentation, and I would just say, hey, we need to get this down to 8 or 9. And that sounds kind of crazy to some people, but you could do it.
No, I spent my career doing that in the private sector.
Because you really do want to have that time so you can get that direction and that leadership. And I saw it so effective, and I was really proud to have the opportunity to spend that time working with him.
Well, thank you so much for your service, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Pete. Thank you for having me here.
Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, let me say before we go, let me talk a little bit about SCORE. SCORE offers low-cost classes and no-charge counseling specifically to guide folks through thinking about starting and succeeding in business. More information is available at scorenashville.org. Make sure to click on the Workshops tab at the top of the page. They're usually a half day, usually weekends, and about $25. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in just a moment. Thanks.